The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Welcome back to the Nova Society, the space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by our regular panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon. Together, we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines, the history, and the big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what the panel has for us today.
Today we have a question from Jazz, who writes to us from Atlanta, Georgia. And Jazz writes, the war in Iran continues to drain taxpayer resources and claim the lives of American service members. This on-again, off-again conflict feels endless, and now the so-called peace memorandum of understanding appears to be dead. Iran has effectively kept the Strait of Hormuz closed. Global markets are facing gasoline shortages, and some countries are burning through their strategic reserves just to stay afloat. And while I don't think President Trump explicitly threatened nuclear weapons, he has made it clear he's willing to intensify military action. Pete Hegseth, who seems open to almost any escalation, has now shifted his focus to the testosterone levels of service members, which doesn't inspire much confidence in his ability to restrain the president if a disastrous decision were on the table. With rhetoric like all hell will rain down, I worry that we may be inching toward putting boots on the ground. This war is deeply unpopular with the American public, and you've all explored this in past episodes. But tonight I want to ask directly, are we moving closer to an all-out war with Iran? Could this spiral into something far larger, a conflict with the potential to resemble a World War III scenario? If escalation continues, what would NATO's position be? Where would Russia and China align? Because from where many of us sit, it feels like the world is creeping closer and closer to a truly global conflict. Yeah, thank you, Jess. One point that I do understand, if I am correct and my understanding is accurate, is that the United States is in fact running out of weapons. And we would not be able to pursue the war for much longer. And that would put an end to any offensive capacity that we have. I don't know, Mark, Scott, what you hear?
Well, I mean, I think the war would actually be even more unpopular if people knew the truth about what's going on. I mean, at this point, we know that they've admitted that they have 3 more casualties. But the speculation is that there's a lot more than that. And that they're just covering that up. And there's, what has gone on in the bases around the Gulf seems absolutely devastating. The amount of equipment that we're losing, the radars that, we're protecting these bases from incoming missiles or drones are no longer operable. So the drones are now getting through. The missiles are now getting through because we can't intercept them anymore. We've spent way too much money intercepting with high value, high cost missiles, intercepting low cost drones. So that's probably not sustainable. And here's the next worst part of this. Iran has asked or told the Houthis that they need to close the Bab, the other strait on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula, which would restrict and has in the past restricted traffic into the Suez Canal. And one other thing that I think is really going to be a game changer is that there's all this fiber optic cable that provides internet. I don't know if you guys know this, but a friend of mine showed this to me a while back, that when you send an email to somebody, it actually shoots across the Atlantic Ocean to Africa, where there are data centers and then shoots back, and it happens in like a split second, so you're never aware of it happening. But there are tools to track where internet traffic is going, and a lot of it zips across the Atlantic Ocean into mainland Africa, and that these cables lie on the seabed, and they're all vulnerable to attack, and that they could shut us down. They can shut the internet down. They can shut banking down. They can shut anything that relies on the internet. All of it is vulnerable, and all of it we depend on. And that is even more of a trump card that they have than shutting the Strait of Hormuz and choking off the oil supply.
Yeah. And I think Scott brings up a very good point. The thing to really keep an eye on at this point in time is the Suez Canal. That would you think it's bad now? Now we're talking even worse. And the conditions as far as trade and as far as oil, with the movement of oil, would blocking the Suez Canal impact some of the world? Yes. Would it not impact some of the world? I believe so. I don't think China would be really all that care that much about the Suez Canal, because basically their oil that they're getting from Iran and the Middle East, it never travels through there. So to them, it's just simply, it's not a strategic interest. But you're right, Jazz. He did not come out and say that he'd use nuclear weapons. He threatens. The problem that we have here in the United States, and I think the problem that the world sees with the United States and Trump, is that it leaves a lot of interpretation as to what the hell he's talking about. What is this rain hell down? I mean, what are we talking about here? And I think that's what makes people very, very nervous. And yes, we have a Secretary of Defense that for some very strange reason is more interested in men's testosterone. Maybe there's something to be asked about there. I don't know. I'm not making an accusation. I just know that I don't care what anybody's testosterone is. But hey, whatever. Would he stop Trump? No, he wouldn't. I mean, he is incompetent. He's absolutely incompetent, and he is not the voice of the voice of reason. That's the adult in the room. There are no adults in the room, obviously, any longer. I mean, that's absolutely that's a thing of the first term, and we all saw what happened to the adults in the room in the first term. They were great guys when they were hired. I hired the best people until they're not the best people. And now they were a complete disaster, and it's same old out of this administration. The difference is that, now the adults are all gone. Are we looking at boots on the ground? Oh gosh, I hope not. I truly, truly hope not. And Scott's right. We've used very high, expensive assets to bring down very low cost but effective drones. Let's remember, these service members that were killed, it's being reported they were killed in Jordan. That's not like right on the border of Iran here, people. So they're getting through, and that should concern all of us, because supposedly we're the Star-Spangled Banner, great mighty United States. And I just saw the other day, and we don't talk about it very often. I hope, but we do have people that write in about the war between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine launched one of the biggest drone strikes on Russia, I think, over the past weekend, over 400. And it's impactful. This is impactful. Maybe we need to get out of the post-World War II attitude, where we're building battleships and stupid things like that. And we're building low-cost but impactful and effective weaponry. But we better start building it now. We better start getting on it now, because the bottom line is that we are probably running out. This is a finite resource. Are we looking at a World War III? I hope not. I really do hope not. The great hope is that everybody keeps their head. If boots get on the ground in Iran, wow, we're going to have trouble. This is not Venezuela. This is not Iraq. This is a very big country, a very geographically diverse country. This would not be easy. This would not be an easy task at all. And we would be getting ourselves even more into a quagmire than we all are. So, but your question about NATO, actually, be honest with you, NATO would have nothing to do with it. This would be the individual countries, because it's not a NATO issue. Even though Trump has been sitting around screaming and crying and yelling about the fact that NATO wasn't helping us in Iran, the fact is that it's not their place. They're defensive. If we're talking about an offensive war, as long as it doesn't impact directly, as long as there is not an attack on the soil of a NATO member, NATO doesn't come into play. It would be the individual countries must make up their minds as to what side they come in on. And there's no guarantee that it's going to be our side. And I think we've got to get that, again, post-World War II ideology and mindset out of our heads to think that, well, because we're the United States, the Germans, the French, the Spanish, who have proven that they don't bend very easy, the Italians, who we've already insulted, Denmark, who we're trying to take their property from them, even the British. We got to be careful. We have to be careful because our allies, what were at one time, we could sit and say, yep, we could always rely on our allies. But
and
today,
the Canadians.
And the Canadians. But, the fact is we could always rely on these allies, and that's not the case anymore. Great Britain's a great example. And I know it's not part of the question, but anybody that watched the World Cup saw the display that the Argentinian team put on after their win against England. And the question then began to come out, and I understand the question, is it possible that Argentina tries to retake the Falklands? I don't know, maybe. But the real question is, are the British capable of defending the Falklands now? This isn't 1982. This is 44 years later. And I have to admit, if there's one thing that Trump has been correct on, it is that the Europeans got fat and soft. Even Great Britain, the once mighty British Navy, the once mighty British Air Force, all the things that Britain brought to the table, they don't have anymore because basically they sat back and said, the United States will take care of it. That's about the only thing that Trump was correct about. And now they're scrambling. To be able to get themselves back into a position to where they can defend themselves. And I think the Falkland Islands was a great example when people came out and said, geez, Argentinians aren't that strong, but gee, neither are the British. They don't think that the new aircraft carrier could actually get there without breaking down. So this is a different world. This is a totally different world. And where would Russia and China align? Who knows at this point? Probably not with us. The question becomes are they aligning with Iran, or are they aligning against the United States, which is possible, or are they just not aligning with us? They're aligning with nobody. And they're basically looking at us and saying, hey, this is your mess, you fix it. Which I think you're going to find a lot of countries. Just after the G7, Trump said, we're not going to trade with Spain anymore. Now, I'm sure the Spanish are really, really worried about that. Really. I'm sure, they're really worried about that. Which is why I thought it was very, very funny when I was watching the World Cup yesterday. Spain wins and Trump's out there, doing the dances. Wait a minute, you just insulted the whole damn country.
Do you know that the Spanish newspapers actually edited him out? They photoshopped him out of the pictures of the team.
No, I did not know that. Can't blame him. and he had to be let off the field by,
Right.
by the head of FIFA.
All they've been
'cause he
doing
was
is
a
making
complete-
fun of him. Oh,
I mean, but so we have to really look at this. We have to say, the allies we had, let's say in 2010, when Obama was the president, the allies we have, we really need to take a closer look at where they stand. There's been talk about taking us out of the Five Eyes. There's been talk. I mean, we've already seen places like Canada begin to foster new relationships with countries that they hadn't really bothered with before because of the United States. And now we're going to set a tariff on them because I don't know, they got a wildfire. These kind of actions, these kind of diplomatic faux pas, I would call them, have created a very unstable situation. The stability of post-World War II was the reliance that it was the United States against the Soviet Union, the Cold War. But everybody knew it was nothing more than a Cold War. Yes, we came a couple of times, the missile crisis, there's a few times we've come pretty close to maybe having a disaster, but we always worked ourselves out because we had reasonable people in office on both sides that understood that this was just not something that we could get away with. And today, on our side, we don't have that anymore. So where it goes from here, that's a really good question.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Looking for conversations made for lesbians and queer women? Welcome to LOTL Lounge, the home of bold stories, brilliant artists, and the voices shaping our community. From lived experience chats to deep dives into queer culture, every episode celebrates lesbian life in all its colour. Search LOTL Lounge wherever you get your podcasts and join the conversation.
The other point with the Spanish not trading with Spain is that we've already been through this. I don't remember if it was a year ago. At some point, it may have been months ago, Trump said, well, I'm not going to trade with Spain because they won't let us use their land as flyover because of the Iran incursion. I don't know, maybe even back in February. And Trump was informed that because Spain is part of the EU bloc, he'd have to, or we, the United States, would have to not trade with the entire bloc. And you can't do that. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to trade with one country of the EU bloc. And Trump, by saying, well, I'm not going to trade with Spain again. I mean, this is months later, so he doesn't remember that entire conversation in the space of months. I mean, he's recycling and revisiting, and we're also back to Greenland again. I mean,
He's really impulsive. I think we could all agree that he's really impulsive. He doesn't really think things through. He's not strategic in any way. He's the opposite of strategic. He's a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy who has had some limited success, in Venezuela. The 12-day war, I would say was a pretty big success, but Iran came out of it, I think, understanding what they were up against and were able to retool their strategy. We have not retooled our strategy. Now, Russia is in a war with Ukraine.
Still.
We are supporting, for the most part, Ukraine in that war. But Trump has this personal thing with Putin that doesn't allow him to be decisive, basically, in that war, which we could be if we just provided Ukraine with the resources that they need to finish it and to chase Putin out and have him withdraw back to Russia. That could happen.
Yeah, but Scott,
But
let me ask you this. Before, you make a very good point. But do we have the resources today with what's going on in Iran? Do we have the resources to actually support Ukraine now? You think?
well, I think we've been giving Ukraine secondhand, weapons, older, more obsolete weapons, rather than the new stuff that we produce. I think we're using the new stuff and we're out of it. But there's probably a lot of old stuff that they could still give them. Old weapons, old missiles, old technology. A new fleet of tanks that hasn't been, operational for decades. It's certainly possible. But I also think that we're in this sort of like, I don't know, I hate to use the word quagmire. It's not really the right word. We're in this puzzle. We're in this like weird jumble here because we believe that the Russians are providing Iran with support, intelligence, satellite, targeting, so the Russians have aligned themselves with the Iranians and Ukraine. We've gotten drone experts to come to the Middle East to meet with us to discuss how to defend against drones and how to use drones in warfare, right? So there are some lines there that, as far as the nations are concerned, seem fairly clear, but the leader of the nation is not with it, which is really a weird position to be in. I mean, can you imagine if we were in the Cold War and all of a sudden Ronald Reagan said, you know what? Instead of fighting the Cold War from now on, we're going to unite with the Soviet Union and we're going to take over the whole world together, because with our arsenal and their arsenal, nobody can stop us. So we're going to, and I'm willing to take the second role. I'll be the second guy. I'm not going to be the top guy. Leonid Brezhnev will be. Yeah, I mean, it's absurd to even think about, but that's essentially what Trump is doing. As far as the Chinese are concerned, the Chinese seem to just want to have their thing. They don't need as much oil as they used to because they've moved on from it. They've got vast storage of it when they need it. They have moved. I saw the stats this weekend on Fareed Zakaria's show. It was pretty stunning, actually. The amount of alternative energy that they use. They are leading the world. We are so far behind, and there's been no movement in this country, by the way, towards saying, you know what, with the Middle East being what it is, we don't want oil anymore. We want to be independent, but the only real way to be independent where oil is traded on a global market is to have alternatives. And that would be the independence, right? So wind, solar, nuclear, thermal, sorry, not thermonuclear, geothermal, all of which we could do, but we're not. And, China has taken the lead on creating electricity in the world, and we are way far behind. Our electric grid is a joke. Brooklyn could be in the dark anytime Canada wants her to be, because her area of New York depends on Canadian electricity. And, strategically, we're just not in a good place, largely because of the leadership of the country. Not because we don't have the capabilities, not that we don't have the potential. We do, but we're not using it. And, Iran is unfortunately making us look like a bunch of monkeys. And, I resent that. And I'm sure that the ultimate price that we're going to pay here is that neither Russia or China looks at us anymore and goes, whoa, we better back away from that country. That is not a small thing. There was a lot of, as Mark pointed out before, that we've come real close a number of times during the Cold War, but everybody backed down because nobody wanted to test the other side. I don't think that that's true anymore. I think that there will be a test. I think that China will test us. I don't know if it's going to be Taiwan necessarily, but I think that China will at some point want to throw a little test there to see how we react to something. And I don't think it's going to be a good response, because I don't think we have the capability. We have the potential capability, but we don't have the strategic capability to do anything about it. And Trump has shown himself to be impatient, to be fly by, as I said before, by the seat of his pants, rather than being strategic, more tactical than anything else. And it's not a great way to to run a foreign policy. You really, the second word in foreign policy is policy, and we don't have any policies.
Yeah. And I think we have to look at the world as it sits today, and we are in an unusual situation, and we are probably one or two conflicts away from this really escalating itself out of control. Scott's correct that at one point in time, people just said, let's not mess with the United States. Let's just not mess with them. The same way people would say, don't mess with Russia. But now we've got a war going on that's been going on for some time between Russia and Ukraine. And Russia, that we said when it first started, wow, they're a paper tiger. They are a paper tiger. They are not what everybody expected them to be. Everybody, if you looked at it on paper, or what the expectations post-World War II were, Russia should have just rolled over Ukraine, and it should have been over and done with within a couple of weeks. That's all that it really was. That's all that was necessary. So that conflict right now has got the rest of Europe keeping its eye on what's going on. So they're distracted. They're distracted by that war there. Then we go to war with Iran, and we prove that we ain't all that we said we're supposed to be. And so we're stuck. Our attention is stuck there, along with everything else that's going on in the Middle East. You don't hear very much about Israel right now in the news cycle, but there's still battling going on between them and Hezbollah and Hamas. And again, everybody's distracted into that. And I brought up Argentina and I brought up England. Back in the day, back in 1982, when the Falkland Wars went on, there was no doubt who's going to win that. There was no doubt whatsoever. Everybody knew, here comes the British. It's going to be over in no time. And it took 69 days. Now we're sitting back and we're saying, gee, maybe they wouldn't be so good. So all these countries that, post-World War II had expectations of being great world powers in 2026 are showing not to be quite as powerful as you thought they were.
With one exception.
Right. China. With China. That's
China.
Right.
China hasn't proven itself to be the paper tiger that we and Russia have proven ourselves to be.
Correct. And let's remember, after World War II, coming out of it, China was pretty much decimated because they were the focus of the Japanese Empire. They didn't come out as some superpower or anything like that. It was really only 20 years later when they started the economic development. They started, nuclear weapon development. But they weren't on par with Great Britain, the United States, and Russia, Soviet Union back then. They weren't on par. They weren't included in any of this. They weren't at the Potsdam Conference or any of these other places. They were basically just the conquered people. Now they have arisen. They have, in that period of time, since post-World War II, brought themselves to truly superpower status, not only militarily, but economically, where the old guard has declined. And I think that is what makes, your fears, Jazz, so real. The fact that this isn't the world of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or early 2000s. This is a new era where the great powers, what we believe were the great powers, aren't great powers, are proven to have gaps, are proven to be a bit wanting. And it opens up a new set, a new world order. And I think that, we could have avoided this we could have got away with people thinking that we were still the most mightiest thing on the face of the earth if we didn't attack Iran and then basically not be able to win.
Yeah.
We're not losing, but we're not winning. And on paper, it's like when you look at baseball, you look at football, you look at all this stuff, you have a pretty good idea going into the match who's supposed to win. One is supposed to be able to outclass the other. Well, guess what? It isn't happening. It just is not happening.
I was just in my head, I was just going around the world real quick and thinking, what could China do around the world to test us, right? And then I thought and so the first thing, of course, I thought about was the Korean Peninsula, right? What mischief they could do there, and then there's a lot in Africa as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because China's big presence in Africa has been a threat. We continue to think of Greenland as being needing protection from China and Russia, but really Africa probably more so, because they've been there for so long. They're so heavily indebted by the African nations, by the South American nations, right? And then I thought, okay, so economics, right? So this isn't going to be a hot war, but it could be an economic war. And what could they do to strike a blow? And you know what the answer is? They could just start buying oil again. Think about what would happen. So oil never got to like $200 a barrel. A lot of people thought it would. Yet. And then we thought to ourselves, well, why didn't it go to $200 a barrel? And the answer turned out to be because China's not buying any oil, right? They're buying like 40% of the oil that they used to. And we talked about the reasons for that. One of them is electricity. The other reason is because they've got these vast reserves that they've built up that we no longer have. But what if they decided all of a sudden, you know what? We're going to start buying oil again. They could raise the price of oil globally to the point where it is $200 a barrel, where all of a sudden inflation in this country skyrockets. And there's nothing we can do about it, right? Unless we just abandon the free market principles that, have been the bedrock of our economy. And so you really kind of look at like the world as it is right now. What's important, what's not important. Apparently missiles aren't all that important. Apparently dropping bombs on people aren't all that important. If you're willing to take the body blows, it's like China, like Iran is doing the rope-a-dope. They're taking the blows, and they're not fighting back. But they're leaning up on those ropes, and they're making us exhaust ourselves. And then, like Ali with Foreman, going to come out, right? Yeah, I mean, it really seems what it is. We can't sustain this. We're not in a long haul war. That we don't want to ever do that again. But China could come in and change the game simply by buying oil.
I believe they have started to buy oil again.
Is that right?
Yeah. How much they're buying, I don't know. But to my knowledge, I can find the program. It was one of Mario Naufel's program that I listened to yesterday. China has started to purchase oil again. How much they're purchasing, I don't believe the gentleman said in the program. But yes, absolutely.
I'm actually looking for August. The preliminary data suggests that Chinese imports are going to be plateaued at about 9 to 10 million barrels a day, which is below the 11.5 to 12 million barrels a day that they were importing before the conflict. So if again, that's we're talking about 2 to 3 to 4 maybe million barrels a day, but you put that on the open market, it changes the price.
Yep.
And also Russia has of course also started to import oil and they're no longer exporting diesel, which they used to be doing. And they're I don't know how much diesel they did export, but they've stopped that. People don't talk about diesel enough, and that's a problem. So I don't know how much diesel Russia has taken off the market, and Russia has been importing instead.
So I just want to finish this conversation with this. We have, I think, proven that we are not, we're not strategic. And I don't see that changing. And probably the best thing that we could do at this point is to bring Kushner and Witkoff home, bring them back to Mar-a-Lago, and get them out of the way. And then withdraw from the region altogether. And say to our partners, because there were 6 nations who were involved in the JCPOA, right? The Security Council, the China, Russia, Great Britain, France, and the United States plus Germany, right? It was a P5+1, I think it was, right? So there's 6 of us. Now we're out. Okay, so there's 5. Those 5 countries need to step up and say, Iran, no nuclear weapons. Hold off. We're gonna end this war. We're gonna try to get things back to normal, and we're gonna wait until Trump is no longer in office. That's the only thing that we can do. We have an incompetent leader who needs to be removed from the scene and should never be involved in anything approaching any kind of foreign policy ever again. And if the Republicans lose the midterms as they're expected to do, right? Trump has never had much interest in legislation anyway, but he'll have less interest in legislation. Usually presidents move to foreign policy when they can't get anything done domestically, but he can't do that. And then what he needs to do is he needs to just back away, enrich himself in any way that he sees fit. He'll continue to do that, I'm sure, with both hands. And just stay out of the way until we can get a president and a team in place that it has the competence, the diplomacy, the skills to manage this crisis to some kind of completion, or at least a status quo, so that Iran doesn't feel the need to have nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't feel, the need to use proxies to fight for it. I don't know how you get there. I'm not saying I do. I don't have the first clue. But I know failure when I see it, and I know that this president has failed. He bit off way more than he can possibly ever chew, and he needs to remove himself from the scene so that grown-ups in other countries can manage this situation, at least until we're at a point where we can speak to people civilly without insulting them, use the skills of diplomacy to get at least some of what we want and give them what they want. And I don't, again, I'm not going to suggest that I know what Iran wants, but right now Iran has become a very, very powerful country. We have made them so. And I think we just have to deal with the fact that we're no longer in a U.S. versus China world. We're now in a U.S., China, Iran world. And I guess you can throw Russia in there for as long as they manage to hold up in their own quagmire. But that really is the world as it stands today, is the USA, China, and Iran. And we did that. Congratulations.
Yes, we did.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershworth, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium dedicated to providing solutions to social and political issues for NGOs and international government agencies. Through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research, the Phoenix Research Group advances understanding and practical strategies for complex challenges. The Phoenix Research Group is a division of the Phoenix Research Institute, the producer of the Nova Society podcast.